Okay. Hello, everyone. This is Professor Rob Merges. I'm a professor at UC Berkeley, and I'm going to talk with you today about intellectual property strategy for business. I assume everyone can hear me. If you're having any problems with that, you can send a chat message and we can deal with it. I would like to thank the International Innovation Education Center, as well as the publisher of our new book, China Legal Publishing, for helping organize this presentation. I'd also like to thank the simultaneous translators who are working hard to make sure that what I say is understandable to you, and I will try to go slow and explain as well as I can so that the translators can do their job. Let me say a few words about this book, because really this lecture is designed to give you a summary and a little taste or flavor of the approach that we take in this book. There are a lot of different strategies and a lot of different legal issues discussed in the book. And in this brief presentation, we have time to give you a small taste. So if we were sharing a dinner together and we had all the dishes on the spinning table, today I would only be able to offer you a few small dishes. If you want the full banquet and a very filling meal, I recommend that you buy the book and feast and enjoy all the different aspects of intellectual property strategy. A few words about what the book title really means and what we are trying to do in this book. I like to make a separation between tactics or small steps and strategies, which is the big picture. Most of what we learn when we are taught as lawyers is individual tactics, and we tend to study one intellectual property right at a time and one small issue at a time, because that's the best way to learn about the legal field. But in legal practice, and especially among business people, the goal is to assemble or build or put together all the tactics you need to carry out a big picture strategy. And a strategy really is just an overall goal or a fundamental purpose that you are trying to achieve. We intentionally included in the title the phrase "for business." So not only do we want to talk about strategy, but we would like to talk about strategy the way that business people think about it. And the real purpose of our book is to show you how to use legal tools and legal tactics to assemble and put together and to serve a business strategy. So what is a business strategy? What's different about a business strategy than other types of strategies? Well, the fundamental purpose of business is to make money. And of course, that means you've got to earn revenue. You've got to have sales. You've got to have money coming in. But of course, the other half of business is to control costs. Revenues are great, but when your cost exceeds your revenue, when you're spending more than you're earning, you're not pursuing a very effective business strategy. So what we do in this book is we talk about how to use and think about intellectual property rights and intellectual property strategy in a way that will maximize your revenue while at the same time controlling your costs. In legal training, we have a lot to learn about how to acquire or assemble intellectual property rights, but we are not always paying close attention to the revenue impact of an intellectual property right, and we rarely pay attention to the cost of acquiring intellectual property rights. We have enough to do in legal training just to learn how to do it, how to acquire a patent, how to acquire a trademark, and then what you can do with it and what the law says about it. But a business person is only interested in acquiring intellectual property rights if they increase revenues and if they are acquired in a way that controls costs. So you might say that the purpose of our book is to teach lawyers to think about intellectual property rights in a way that's natural for business people to think about them. You want to think about what effect an IP right will have on your revenue stream. And you want to think about how much will it cost me to acquire and maintain and enforce my intellectual property right? And is the cost that I'm going to have to pay out, is it worth it? Does it make business sense given how much revenue I can expect with the assistance of my intellectual property rights? So that basic approach of using intellectual property rights to pursue an overall strategy, and remembering that the goal of all business strategies is to increase revenue and control costs, that's really what we are trying to accomplish with this book. So I hope that you can see the next slide as I advanced it. I am trying to simultaneously show the slides as I proceed through here. If you're not seeing the second slide, please send a chat message and I can fix the problem. The basic tools of intellectual property strategy are the basic intellectual property rights. And many of you are probably familiar with these, at least to some extent. So we have patents and we have copyrights, we have trademarks, which marketing or business people typically think of as brands or branding. And then we have trade secrets, a special type of IP rights. So these are the basic building blocks in the intellectual property toolkit. And they are what we start with when we think about building up the IP rights that are connected to any business. Okay. So here I move on to the next slide and just talk a little bit about the goals of IP strategy in a little bit more detail. On a revenue side, intellectual property can be helpful in two different ways. it can help you to preserve or protect an existing revenue stream. And especially for big companies with established products, this is a very important function of intellectual property, because any big company with substantial sales is very likely to become a target for new entrants and for competitors who would like to take a slice or like to take a piece out of the big company revenue. So intellectual property is often used by big companies to defend what you already have and to protect it. New companies that are trying to enter an existing field are on the other side of that particular issue. They're trying to enter a field and build up revenues. And intellectual property rights can be extremely helpful. They can sometimes be essential, completely necessary to get that first entry point in an existing industry. So these are the revenue-related aspects of intellectual property strategy. When we think about protecting revenue streams, and when we think about how intellectual property rights can help with that, it really boils down to, or it resolves to, or to put it simply, it really involves identifying competitive threats, identifying companies or products that might begin to cut into or reduce your existing revenue stream. And when you think about that possibility, you want to think about three issues. The source of the competition. Is it another big company? Is it a new entrant? Is it a big company that's moving into a new market, which is one of your established markets? You want to think about the degree of the threat. How big of a threat is this potential entry? What kind of erosion or what kind of negative impact could this entry have on your revenue stream? Those are the issues that you need to think about when you are thinking about protecting a revenue stream with an intellectual property right. And basically, what it boils down to, what you need to think about in terms of the strategy here, is acquiring and building up your intellectual property portfolio in a way that best protects you against this erosion or this incursion or this attack on your existing revenue stream. That's really the best way to think about the IP rights. And notice that I use the term portfolio. That's a term we use in the book a lot. That's a way of thinking about intellectual property, which again is typical for business people. The portfolio just means the entire collection of all of a company's IP rights. Now again, in legal training, we learn about each intellectual property right one by one. And we tend to learn by looking at one single IP right, often by looking at one single issue involving that right. A business person thinks about intellectual property differently. They think about intellectual property as a group of rights which they've spent money to acquire and which they want to use or employ in a way that benefits the business. And from a business point of view, the important fact about intellectual property is how many rights you have and how you can use that collection of rights to achieve a strategy. So lawyers tend to think one right at a time and often just one issue at a time. Business people look at the entire group of IP rights that the company has and thinks about intellectual property as that collective or group asset. And so in the book, we try to take that approach. I can give you a very simple example of how to think about IP portfolios and a simple strategic analysis that a lot of companies undertake, and that is fairly, I think, straightforward. So if you look at this little diagram in this slide, on the left I have a simple diagram which shows the revenue share between two products that a company has, product A and then product B. So the box on the left is a kind of a diagram that shows where does your revenue come from between the two products A and B. On the right, you're looking at the entire IP portfolio and thinking about what rights in that portfolio cover or protect which products. So some of the rights in your portfolio protect product A, or to be more accurate, typically an IP right will protect a feature or a component or a part of product A. But the diagram on the right shows which of your IP rights are connected to which products, product A and product B. And you notice there aren't very many rights, or really in this diagram, there are no rights that seem to cover product B. And so you have here an intellectual property portfolio which is not balanced compared to your revenue streams. A lot of revenue here comes from product A, and you do have IP rights that cover that. But there's also some revenue here coming from product B. And your IP portfolio seems empty with respect to product B. And this kind of analysis can help you from an overall point of view to plan strategy. In this case, the obvious strategic response is we better get some IP rights that cover product B, unless we're leaving the market for product B, or unless the product B revenue is expected to shrink for other reasons. But in this simple approach, you simply want to look at your IP portfolio and see how it relates to and the degree to which it covers revenue streams from different products, okay? The last point on this page is a little summary of one of the strategic examples we give in the book. And this is in the chapter on global trademark or brand strategy. It's just an example of the type of analysis that we try to do. And basically, to summarize, the problem in that chapter that we're talking about is a problem that companies sometimes encounter when they have an established trademark in their home country and they are planning to expand to other countries. So if you have a successful product in China, you may think about exporting then to Europe or the United States. Sometimes you can find a conflicting trademark in a country that you would like to move into. And when that happens, you have to make a strategic choice. You can either change your trademark, your brand, in all countries. You can undergo a rebranding because you have a conflict in one country, or you can choose a separate, different trademark for the one country where you have a conflict, and you can keep the old trademark or brand in the other countries. And in this chapter, we go through the analysis that a business person, a marketing person, would pursue in order to think about that problem. Because when you add a new brand in a new country, some of your advertising, some of your marketing based on your old brand may not help you very much in the new country because the marketing and advertising is connected to your old brand. So we talk a little bit about the costs and benefits of these two approaches. LCD, the least common denominator, meaning the trademark that works everywhere, versus country by country, where you have branching or different trademarks. And each one has some advantages and costs. But that's the kind of problem that we talk about in the book. And just to remind you of something I said a few minutes ago, acquiring a new trademark or fighting someone else's trademark, these are legal tactics. The question, how many brands should we have around the world? That's a question of strategy. Once you decide on a strategy, if you say, well, we're going to have multiple brands, then the tactics are easy. You go ahead and you acquire trademarks for the new brand in the country where you need them. And again, I'm just trying to show the relationship between strategy, which is usually taking account of costs and benefits, versus tactics, which are the small steps you take to pursue or to advance a strategy. Okay? Another way that companies undertake a portfolio analysis is to compare their portfolio to the portfolios of their main competitors. And this can take a number of different forms. Sometimes you just want to know whether you have enough patents or you have enough trademarks to protect your business in the markets where you operate. And sometimes it's helpful, especially if you're a new company, to say, well, how many patents do I need? One way to look at that is to say, how many patents are held by my competitors? Now, sometimes your competitor might be bigger, in which case you would want to look at how many patents they have in relationship to their revenues. And then you look at how many patents you have in relation to your revenues. So you can do that kind of comparison just to see if you're roughly in alignment or if you're roughly similar to the portfolios of some of your competitors. There are a lot of variations on this kind of portfolio analysis. And again, I can't cover very many right now. The book has a number of examples. One of the most important examples involves looking at the countries where your business has operations and looking at the types of activities that your company pursues or does in each country, because your IP portfolio should reflect all the countries, all the nationalities, all the regions where you derive revenue or where you generate new products. So sometimes even if you don't sell any product in a country, you might want to have some IP protection. If you manufacture in that country, or if you supply components for assembly in that country. These are situations where the regional supply chain and the regional breakdown of your business operations should be looked at carefully and again aligned with, put in relationship with your IP portfolio. Okay? I'm going to look at one case study of a particular IP strategy that was carried out in an important and growing industry, and that is the commercial drone industry. So I'm going to talk a little bit about two companies that compete in the drone industry. One is Dajiang, everybody knows it, DJI, I call it here. The other is a well-known company that was trying to move into the drone field, was trying to enter the drone market. And that's a company called Autel. This is a typical a corporate strategy problem. It actually involves operations in a number of countries. Both of these companies have extensive operations in Shenzhen in China, but both of them also had targeted the US market. And it was a competition for entry and revenue in the US market that created the problem that I'm going to talk about, which is one specific legal case or legal conflict, legal dispute between these two companies. And this was a conflict that played out in a U.S. intellectual property forum, a U.S. intellectual property court. It's a special court with a few special features. It's called the International Trade Commission, and it's part of the U.S. government. And I just want to show a little bit about the strategy of the two companies and what they were trying to do with this IP dispute and how it worked out, and some of the tactics they used in pursuit of the strategy. That's really a lot of what I want to talk about. So let me just say something briefly about this International Trade Commission, ITC, in the U.S. The job of the ITC is to prevent imports into the U.S. that are unfairly competing with existing products sold in the U.S. And there are a number of ways that an import can be unfair. One way is that the imported product is supported by subsidies, by special government favors. Another way is that an imported product can infringe an IP right of a company that already has a presence in the U.S. market. And it's this type of unfairness, you might call it the IP branch of unfairness, that brings the ITC into the intellectual property area. In the business of keeping out unfair imports, the ITC sometimes has to decide whether an imported product is covered by an existing U.S. patent or trademark or copyright. And if an imported product would infringe an existing U.S. IP right, then the ITC, the International Trade Commission, has the authority to keep that imported product out. It's called an exclusion order. It basically says, if an import would infringe an IP right, we keep it out. And that's how this government agency becomes involved in intellectual property. There are some features of the ITC that are favorable, that are beneficial for IP owners. It can be quicker to get a result than taking an IP case to a U.S. court. It can also give you a powerful exclusion remedy. It can keep out imports in a way that is easier and more effective than the same kind of remedy in a court. And so that is a good forum for IP owners, and that's the one where our drone story plays out. That's the one where the drone story really took place. Okay, so in the drone field, DJI is well known. They were an early pioneer of drone technology, and they have a number of different types of drones that are sold in different markets. Some drones are used to inspect remote or dangerous areas. Some drones are used to take photos. And of course, companies are trying to develop drones for product delivery so that drones could take the place of a delivery truck or someone who delivers meals or food on their scooter. The drone market has a number of potential growth areas. So in this particular fight between the two companies, Autel, which is a robotics company, was the new entrant. They were the new player. And DJI was the established player that had been around for a while. In the first round of conflict between the companies, DJI won fairly easily because DJI has been in the drone business for a long time, and Autel was a new company that was coming in. And so after the first round of fighting, Autel decided they needed some kind of legal strategy that would assist them with their business goals. And the particular strategy they adopted is one we talk about in the book, which can be helpful. If you are a new entrant and you haven't had time to build up your IP portfolio, you're faced with a difficult problem because the other companies in the field that have been there for a while probably already have big IP portfolios. So you're like a runner in a race who starts the race behind. You're trying to catch up with the lead runner. And one way you can do that in the intellectual property field is to try to go out and go shopping, for IP rights that have already been granted and are already out there. Now, these IP rights that are already granted, they're owned by other companies. And there is a market for the sale of IP rights when you want to go shopping for them. If you know where to look, you might be able to acquire them. And the benefit of the secondary market is that you don't have to wait to build up your portfolio. When you build your own portfolio, it takes time because governments in granting IP rights can be slow. It can take 3 to 5 years to obtain a US patent. It can take a year or 2 or 3 to obtain a Chinese patent. I'm talking now about invention patents. Utility models in China are quicker, and that can be a feature of Chinese IP strategy. But while you are building up your own IP portfolio, you may be exposed because your competitors are ahead in the race. They already have a portfolio. So what do? In this strategy, you go shopping for IP rights, okay? Where might you find them? Well, in this case, the key IP right is patents. Patents on drones are important because they cover important features of drones. And if you have a patent on the features or components of your drones that are unique or distinctive, the patent can help protect your profit margin. By patenting the unique components or features, you can prevent anyone else, any competitor, from copying those unique features. And if those features are what drives your profit margin, then the patents on those features have a very important positive impact on your revenue stream. And so those are the ones that you'd want to seek. Okay, so Autel, as the runner who started behind, needed to catch up. And so they decided they were going to go shopping for patents. Well, where did they shop? There are typically two places or two types of companies where you can acquire a patent. One is from big companies. Big companies start a lot of projects which they never finish or which they abandon. Big companies are involved in many different research operations. They're involved in developing many potential products. Not all the products work out. Sometimes management changes its mind. Sometimes new managers come in and they say, this old project that you're pursuing, we don't think it's any good. When that happens, the old project or the old technology or the old product becomes an orphan. It doesn't have any parents anymore. The people who believed in it are gone. And sometimes the new management will sell off some of the assets connected to the old project. One of the assets they sell off sometimes is patents. And so that's one place where you can go shopping for IP rights. Okay. The other place is small companies, new entrants, startups. Sometimes a startup company starts out with a big push. They acquire a number of patents in a field. But then, as often happens with small companies, they may run into cash flow problems. They may run into financial difficulties. If they are trying to find a way to survive, and typically that means trying to survive until the next funding round, until the next investment from a private equity company or a venture capital company, or maybe they're trying to survive as they develop a product, a new product they believe will be profitable. The point is, sometimes when they are trying to survive, they sell off some of their existing assets just to get enough money to keep going. And of course, one of the assets they sell sometimes is patents. So you can also go shopping for patents with small companies that need money. Okay. Now I'm going to show you a couple patents that Autel acquired as they were working out a strategy of playing catch up, of trying to catch up to DJI. And these are patents that they acquired to try to build up their portfolio quickly, while at the same time they were getting their own patents and probably getting their own trademarks as well. The first one is this one here. It's a U.S. patent. You can see the number on the top. It's 7979174. But the line to focus on is on the left. It's at the bottom. It says Assanee. You see that? It has that number 73, which is just the number describing that part of the patent. It says Assanee, Honeywell International Incorporated. Honeywell is a big company. They do a lot of projects. Somewhere along the line, someone at Honeywell decided, let's try to get in the drone business. Somewhere later along the line, someone in Honeywell said, let's not get in the drone business, or at least not in this way with this technology. When they decided that, they decided to put this patent up for sale on the secondary market. And so when Autel went shopping for patents, through a network of brokers, through a network of secondary market companies, they found out about this Honeywell patent and they bought it. So this is just an example of a patent you might shop for, playing catch up, that you try to use then in the competitive struggle with the existing company, in this case, DJI. Okay? I'm not going to go through the details of this patent. The slides are available if you want to look at them. The real point of it really is just to sort of focus quickly. This is basically a patent on how to calculate the flight path, how to calculate and determine where a drone should fly based on information the drone is receiving from the planned route and path and modified by sensor data about the environment of the drone. So it's just a path calculation patent. It's typical of most patents in the sense that it covers only one feature or one part of a technology. This is not a patent on the drone in its totality. This is not a patent on a drone overall. It's just a patent on the way to calculate the flight path of a drone. And this is a good explanation of why companies need patent portfolios, because patents rarely cover an entire product. They more often cover features or components or parts. And that's why you need to build a portfolio carefully. And you need to make sure the portfolio covers the features and components that drive your profit margin. And that's part of the business strategy, where you're acquiring IP rights that serve the goals of the business. That's really just part of the thinking that goes into it. This is a second patent. This is a different patent. And you see the number on the right is 9260184. This patent was issued to a little company and, in fact, was assigned to an individual who is one of the founders of a little company. And this is an example of a patent held by a small company that's trying to sell it to just stay alive. This is a patent that's being sold for cash flow purposes. Again, it covers a fairly narrow feature of drones. In this case, it covers the way the rotors or propellers are connected to the propeller supports. So you see the 4 propellers on this drone model. They're all connected to the supports, and the simple point of this patent is that as the rotors spin, it tends to tighten the connection between the rotor and the support. It's the spinning is in the direction that tightens the rotor on the support. Okay. Again, it's a minor feature. Now, this strategy that was pursued was really, again, just a way to get some patents that might offset or compete against the DJI patents. And Autel was just simply trying to catch up and get into the game by shopping for some patents. This was the subject of a International Trade Commission enforcement, and Autel used these patents against DJI, and Autel was trying to threaten DJI because if they won this case, if this investigation or enforcement was successful, the result might be an exclusion order which kept out the DJI drones from being imported into the US. Now notice here, both Autel and DJI have extensive Chinese operations, but they're still using the International Trade Commission in the US. That's a feature of most IP systems. You don't have to be a resident of a country to use that country's courts to protect your IP. You just have to have IP in the country where you're using the country's courts. And so these patents that Autel purchased were US patents, and the result they were hoping for was to prevent DJI from importing drones into the US. So this is just an example of a corporate strategy that had a few interesting tactics connected to it. It's got some interesting lessons. It's really the last point I think that I want to focus on. It's the catch-up strategy. The patents can be acquired quickly as you are in the middle of a conflict. Even after another company sues you for patent infringement, you can still go out and go shopping for some patents to use against them. And that's a strategy that a fair number of companies are using these days. Before I come off this slide, I should say, just recently, I think in the last few weeks, the International Trade Commission decided this case. They decided against Autel. They decided that both the patents that Autel acquired were invalid. They turned out not to be any good. Okay. So from a strictly legal point of view, the strategy did not succeed. But if you think about it from a business point of view, this case was filed in 2018. This International Trade Commission enforcement action was filed in 2018. The patents were only invalidated in the last few weeks. So for 2 years, Autel had a threat against DJI. For 2 years, they were involved with DJI in an International Trade Commission case. During those 2 years, Autel was no doubt filing their own patents. They were no doubt shopping for other patents. Assuming they want to stay in this market, the 2 years that they gained by these patent acquisitions were probably not wasted. So even though in the end the legal result was not what they wanted, that doesn't mean the strategy had no benefit. And again, thinking from a business point of view, you will sometimes realize that simply making a move or beginning an enforcement action can be an effective part of the strategy, regardless of whether it succeeds, regardless of whether in the end you achieve exactly the goal that you wanted. Okay. I should also say that in this kind of strategic battle, it's absolutely crucial for a company like Autel to keep its eye on the cost of implementing the strategy. And in this case, that really had two components. One was the cost of buying these patents. When you go shopping for a patent, you have to spend money. The other cost was the cost of the International Trade Commission action itself. Most of that went to paying the lawyers who were involved in the ITC case. An effective business strategy is one where those costs are determined in advance, and you make a strategic decision that those costs are worth the benefit that they are likely to bring you. Okay, again, for a business strategy, you want to think not only what effect will it have on my revenue, but can I control costs also? And that is a feature of this kind of strategy that a successful company will always think about. Any acquisition or enforcement has to be considered in a cost-benefit framework if it's going to be a successful business strategy, okay? Now, in the Autel DJI case, in many ways, the Autel strategy was a defensive strategy because DJI had some patents already. Autel was just trying to protect against those patents so it could enter the market. The acquisition of other company patents in this case was really designed to bring a little pressure onto DJI to keep DJI from dominating and pushing out Autel so that Autel could have a chance to enter the market. Sometimes you think about using IP in a more offensive way. And an offensive IP strategy is one where you are really thinking about using your IP portfolio to make money. You want to turn your IP portfolio into a positive cash flow, money-making activity. And in the book, we talk a little about when that might be necessary. And I can say a few more words about it. But we do talk a little bit about the difference between offensive and defensive strategies because they have slightly different characteristics that you need to think about. Another aspect of strategy which gets fairly advanced, we talk about it in the book, are cases where you have an existing IP portfolio and you decide not to enforce your rights against your friends, against a circle of friends or allies, but hold on to the rights in case you need to use them against a competitive threat. against an enemy in the future. So sometimes you will let people use your IP while holding on to your IP in case you need to use it later against other people. And that's an aspect of patent strategy that can be fairly advanced. There are ways that you can let your friends into your IP portfolio called patent pledges, and of course, open source software and open patent commitments are examples of this. These are cases where you hold your portfolio in reserve in the background while agreeing not to enforce your IP against your friends. And there are some interesting strategic dimensions to that kind of strategy. Let me just say a word about the first item on this slide, because I think it is sometimes important. We talk about in the book taking the IP bridge to a new stage of growth. Now, sometimes a company finds itself short on cash, short on revenue, because it is building up to introduce a new product. And sometimes during this low cash flow period, a company might take some of their IP rights and either sell them. That's what the little company did that sold the rotor patent to Autel. They were taking the IP bridge, trying to survive. Sometimes a big company will try to monetize or earn revenue from its IP portfolio because their current products are not making very much money and they need some money to introduce a new generation of products. And that's an offensive strategy we call taking the IP bridge. There are a number of factors that go into how you assemble the tactics into an offensive strategy. I don't have time to talk about them now, but they're covered, I think, pretty adequately in the book. A defensive strategy that we talk about has to do with filling gaps or filling holes or filling empty places in your IP portfolio. This diagram here just shows the acquisition of a series of patents, patent 1, 2, 3. And in this case, as sometimes happens, the portfolio is not completely tight. It's not complete. There are some holes or gaps. And sometimes a competitor will have a patent that sort of fits in between your patents. When that happens, there are a number of strategies you can pursue, and we talk about in the book how to do it. One is to try to invalidate that competitor patent. The other is maybe to acquire it. And then there are some strategies involving changing your product design to avoid that patent. So this is a defensive type of strategy that just shows that your strategies have to be amended and maintained over time for them to be effective, if you really want them to be effective. Okay. This is a part of the book which comes down at the end, and this really has to do with how to implement or carry out an IP strategy. And really what this part of the book is about, it's really about building up a strategic IP team inside a company. It's really about how to design the IP strategy process so that it works well and so that it is able to perform the function that you want it to perform. A lot of what we talk about here is how to integrate the IP strategy team into the other parts of a company, how to put an IP strategy voice in a product planning committee or in a research planning committee. It's important to take IP strategy into account when you are implementing business strategy, and it's important for the IP team to have an awareness of what the business goals are and how the business goals are changing. And we talk here in this final chapter about how to build the IP strategy function as a company grows and how to integrate the IP strategy team inside the company. And this comes from a lot of experience that I have and that my co-author Liu Fang has in looking at different size companies, looking at their patent portfolios, and thinking about how to make IP strategy an integral part of the company. Okay, so again, I tried to give you here in this hour just a sampling, a small taste of what we're talking about in this book. Again, the overall goal is to think about IP rights the way a business person does. And if you are a lawyer legally trained, the goal is to use your knowledge, use your legal knowledge, and your experience with legal tactics in a way that assembles and builds up and implements an effective IP strategy, how to translate tactics into strategy, and how to add value as an IP professional in the eyes of business people. Because if you show business people that you know how to think about IP from a business point of view, you're going to be a more valuable IP professional. I've reached the end of my hour, and the question I have now is, have I gotten any questions that I can answer?